Welcome back to the SSI Executive Conversations podcast. This is part two with Berk Tas, the CEO of Centiar. On this episode, Darwin and Berk continue their discussion about the direction of Centiar in the upcoming years, the importance of voice of customer, and Berk's personal career journey.
For where you guys are at, let's give a little bit more information about the company relevant to kind of what's the goal and direction
Mhm.
that you're leading the company in over the next 1 to 3 years.
Yeah, thank you. Um,
I want to make
so
sure we get that,
yeah,
we
yeah.
get that promotional piece out for you.
No, thank you. Thank you. So Sentiar raised a round early this year, beginning of the year, and currently we're putting that to use for deploying what we call our micro commercialization strategy, limited um, hospitals, limited accounts, and our primary objective, talking about KPIs, our primary objective is validating the different value propositions that the system has.
Mm,
What exactly does it do for the clinician? In which part of the procedure? How would that translate to long-term benefit for the patient? And currently, that's what we're after is assessing those specific value propositions. How do they use the system? There are zero equivalents to what we're doing right now, so there's nothing we can pull from history. We can't
right,
say, last time people used a holographic guidance system,
right.
this is how that works. Like there is no such thing. So,
You're
um,
trailblazing.
right, and as a part of that, we need to learn how do they engage with the product. We have years of ideas, but I don't do cases, right?
Hmm.
And 99% of our team does not. They don't do cases. One does, and she has a lot of opinions herself. And now we get to see it out in the wild as it goes out. So we have specific measures, specific accounts that we're working on. And then the other thing we're working on is expanding our partnerships, which imaging systems we integrate with. Uh, we got approved with our integration with one of them, and there's more coming. So we're working on those integrations. And then lastly, we are focused on the team, how we're growing our team. We've already doubled in size over the last couple of years, a few more folks coming on.
That's
It's
great.
a transformational time for a team as they go through this kind of thing, especially as you emerge out of R&D only to you still have to develop stuff, but now have a product in the field that you have to support.
Right.
What does that look like? Now you have feedback, right? Every week there are 6, 8 clinical cases done with our system. There's just feedback coming in. What does that look like? How do you make sense of that? What processes do you implement? And inevitably, it comes with some controls that you didn't have before, which is a part of growing pain. It creates a little bit of chaos, and that chaos is important. You do need to put some different things you didn't have before in place. So those are our focus points right now for the looking at next 12 months. I think beyond that, we're currently going through our strategy for what the next 3 years look like for us. Is Centiar supporting um, multiple partners in the long term? Are we continuing to develop new features for our product and adding uh, different abilities it doesn't have today to replace the status quo entirely? Or is there a different strategy in between? Do we take a more stepwise approach?
Mm.
So, you know, we will we will let our customers tell us what they want to see.
That is I gotta stop you right there because that what you just said, hello, that is so smart and voice of the customer. Yes, you'll let. I mean, this. I maybe some people would maybe be like, well, what do you mean stop? And no, that is so smart because there's so many scenarios where people don't listen to their customers, and I just think that is. That was so smart. Yeah, there's multiple ways you could go, but you're going to let your customers and the value that you bring to them determine what the most efficient and best direction is how I would state it.
Right? And you don't do that by asking them, like, "What should we do?" You
Right, right.
observe. You watch them. Like, you go engage, and that's why
Mhm.
limited commercialization
That's why your
in
clinical and
my
your commercial teams are so huge. How
it's
important
absolutely critical, and in my opinion, also, like, every time you emerge out of R&D, you must have a limited release where you can see your product in the wild, where you can observe that the principles of the business. I have seen 50 cases myself.
they are. Mhm.
I've been in those labs, sometimes on my own, with no one on our team, because to me, that's where the gold is,
Mm,
right? You
right.
worked on it for so long. Now you put it in the hands of people that have nothing to do with your business. They don't care whether you succeed or not. They just want their life to be better,
Absolutely right.
right? And they want to treat their patients easier, more efficiently, more effectively. So that's where the gold is, and you got to observe. And that's when I say customers will tell us most likely they can't articulate what they want, but you will see it if you're there. And if you go too far out, in my opinion, you come out at R&D and you just go everywhere because now you have your FDA clearance. Why don't you sell it to 1,000 accounts? Because then I don't get to see it,
Right.
right?
And
Then
you're
I
gonna miss
don't
certain
know.
things.
You're gonna miss, and in you're going to make clearly. I believe there's going to be mistakes that are costly. Can it work that way? Yeah, there's a lot of examples companies succeeding like that. I think they spend a lot more capital than they should. They probably go through a lot more pain than they should. So I think a little bit of patience is critical at this stage, and going out and engaging and learning from what's happening out there. So I agree. I think it does require a pause because it seems obvious what I said, but it doesn't get practiced often.
It doesn't, and whether it's Bernie Haffey or Karen Posey or I work with previous chief commercial officers that are now consultants. I know story after story companies that I've worked with where a focus is on something. It's like that's not actually where companies think their number one who their main focus is for customers, or and they don't even really know who their customers are. They're
Yeah.
completely looking at the wrong data or have a perception of the data that's completely wrong. So I just think that's so smart. Your background, I always thought was remarkable when I first got to meet you at the Sage. I think Sage Surgical Conference was maybe the
That's
first
right.
one a couple
That's
years
right.
ago. But your career path. We've talked about this one on one. We always love kind of having conversations on emotional intelligence and culture. But you started, in R&D and then moved into leadership over engineering, then over R&D, I think, operations, compliance, then to a VP and then the CEO of exciting startup that I think your leadership is critical in terms of where the company's going and going to go. But maybe share a little bit about some keys to your career path. And I, I think maybe, and we could talk about candidate perception or executive, but I'd prefer if maybe you'd kind of give a CEO or executives that are listening a perspective on maybe what they should consider of the crossover talent. I see so many situations where people miss out on talent, where
Yeah.
I call it miss the forest for the trees because they're too focused on maybe a couple of skills and they're not open to crossover skills.
It's a tough one, you know. So the my career path we can talk a little bit about, and then tying it to how an executive could look at these gems, if you will, right?
Right.
Not that I call myself a gem, but I think as I
Well,
think about it,
I'll call you Jim. I know many people that would
thank
agree with me, so we'll take that out of your decision making and call you Jim. Go ahead.
thank you. That's very kind. So I started in engineering I feel like it's mainly because I never really was presented with another option. You know,
Mm,
like for me, I grew up in Turkey. So in Turkey, everyone who has a job is an engineer. My brother is in banking, he's an engineer.
uh,
Right? He went to
wow.
school for industrial engineering and then he is a banker now. And he's been a banker his whole career. I can give example after example. You're a marketing executive, you're an engineer. You were in sales, you were an engineer.
Wow.
So engineering has become a way to filter out folks in an arbitrary way. It's not right. I don't agree with it, but that's just the way it is in where I grew up. So
Hmm.
if you want to be able to compete for jobs, you had to go and get an engineering degree. And then, I had an interest, like I was very curious about how things worked and things like that, but I wasn't one of those people who like broke down cars when they're 15, Like
Right.
that's not how I grew up. I had an interest, certainly, and I was very, very curious, very like annoyingly curious. That's probably one trait that serves me well to this day, and I've learned not to be very annoying with it. But growing up, that's certainly a thing that was there. Um, but I wasn't necessarily like this amazing engineering talent, you know.
Right.
But that's what I went to school for, and I had this opportunity. I came here as an exchange student in high school, and I was very fortunate to get a scholarship to study. And that's a big turning point for me. Whoever
Hmm.
made that decision, whatever the group of people, I would love to go thank them individually. I don't know who they were, right? You submit your application and then, you get a result. Um, it was, to this day, I'm very, very grateful. But that's how I ended up in an engineering program, and I loved it. I really, really enjoyed problem solving and the teamwork that it required and how difficult it was. Electrical engineering physics is what I studied. So um, then I started working for an industrial robotics company as an as an IT. It's funny to say, I was an
That's
IT
I
guy.
see. Yeah.
I was an IT guy. They had a problem with their computer. I helped them, and we wrote applications for the actual engineers to use in their day-to-day work and things like that. That's what I used to do. Then I started, getting involved in the robotics, and I wrote robotics software. And there's a great anecdote there I can share with you someday and how that worked out.
Okay.
Like talking about just showing up, like we can dig into that if time allows. Anyways, so quickly I attached myself to people that really cared about what their products did, what their work was doing. And one of our projects was with J&J's Vistacon department, contact lens manufacturing. And we sat down with these folks, and I was so envious of the pride they took in what they did. I was just sitting there in awe. Like I'm super young still, right? Early
Right.
20s. And I'm like, wow, I want to be like that. I want to have this passion that these people have. And they would routinely talk about what it does for their patients and the quality. Like it was just in their vernacular.
Right.
We
You can
were
tell
just
they care.
hired.
They're passionate about it.
Definitely, right? And we were just hired guns showing up. We're like, oh, equipment here, equipment there. Like they're all the same to us,
Right.
but it's not like that for them. So that's triggered this interest. And I think one thing I would say is this continuous interest and curiosity is what drove me from position to position or on a corporate ladder. I joined Boston Scientific, and there, the way I became the leader of the group I joined was simply offering to help other people or asking for help. Like
Right.
I would get my stuff done and I'll be like, "Hey, what are you working on? Oh, you got this laser welding problem? I would love to help.
So
Can I be
smart.
involved?" Right? And I like I said, this curiosity and interest, and I think perhaps like, I don't have a lot to lose, right? If
Hmm.
you look at where I come from, what can happen to me? I didn't come from like a really. poor background or anything. We were fine. But we don't have the stuff that I have here, and I
Right.
still, I was still raised in a family, and I was fine.
Yep.
So I think like detachment from all these things helped me take risks. I could ask questions. I can sign up for assignments that others may not. I'd work late. I was young. I can do that. And quickly, people are like, "Hey, Berg is helpful,
You made
right?
yourself indispensable in certain
He,
aspects.
right? Like he's helpful. Yeah. If he's gonna manage us, we'll be okay with that." You know. Um, Certainly, I was very ambitious. I think um, part of me, like I would do it differently now. I think I think ambition is very good, but I think uh, making people feel safe is better. And
Mm,
sometimes ambition can be threatening.
right. Yes.
Um, so that's a lesson I've learned over time. Uh, I think overall, my benefits hopefully outweighed the risks, and I got different promotions within Boston Sci, and then startup journey began. I joined a startup. I met the CEO on a plane ride, and then a year later, I started working for him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there's anecdotes like this in my life. I think again, it's one of those where I'm just curious and I'm interested, and we had a 6-hour plane ride. And turns out it was a 6-hour interview that I didn't know.
Which
So I don't
is
know.
it's a really important point though, right? In terms of how you interact with people, how you treat people. And even when you said, hey, ambition can be threatening, right? Or it can be, but if you're real, if you're transparent about your ambition and you're focused on bringing value to other people, then
See,
because I think
that last part is key.
because
It's
it's
not about
only
you. It's
and you're
not
not you're
about
not
you.
because if it's not, then it can be manipulative, and
Yes.
that's where
Yes.
you can cause.
If it's self-serving,
Mm, yeah,
people are instinctive, right?
right.
You think you may have gotten away with that. Trust me, you didn't.
No, no, you
If
did.
what you're doing is self-serving, people, lizard brain, over thousands of years of evolution, it knows.
Right, right.
You have not tricked anyone, only yourself,
Yeah,
probably.
for sure.
Um, so I think that's the important part. I think actually that's probably the switch for me is like it's not about me, and it
Mm,
never should be about me. And once I've made that, it's a transformation. Then it's like whole world changes. You know?
yeah, levels of
Yeah,
consciousness.
really. I mean, I think um, that's probably the big uh, transition point when I look at my career. And I would say if you're an executive and evaluating somebody for an executive role, like an engineer or a marketing person, whatever, salesperson, I think this is the big, um, I don't want to call it a skill, but makeup, personality. This is probably what you want to tease out. Like, what are these people willing to do
Hmm.
for other people? Like how
Yes,
motivated are they? They don't not everyone has to be, right?
right.
That this is not
Well,
a bad thing. You may not be that interested in like affecting tons of people. And that's great. That's great. But then perhaps then leadership isn't the best role for that,
right.
right?
And what you just said is, I mean, it. This is the thing that it amazes me. Across companies don't necessarily do a great job of evaluating technical skill in a functional area, like actually
Mhm.
capturing. Like if you're a software developer, you probably ought to have to do some sort of software developing to meet a minimal skill set. And then if I'm interviewing for software developers, then I have that consistent where I capture it and I can compare and contrast. Hey,
Right.
these two, hit the minimum threshold, but they're well above it. These other two, one of them didn't quite hit it, the other one's just above it. So after that, like these two are stronger, and I know that because of my process. But now after they've hit that minimal skill, what is their emotional intelligence, problem
Yeah.
solving? Are they going to fit the culture? What's their personal why? Because you can look at data over a variety of sources.
Mhm.
Leadership IQ is one of them. Out of failed hires, 11% were because the candidate didn't have the actual skill set they were hired for, essentially.
Mhm.
The other
Mhm.
89% was low emotional intelligence. They weren't coachable. They weren't motivated, which is
Mhm.
incredible, right? So they weren't really excited about what they were doing or the product category, or they had poor temperament. They just really didn't get along well with others.
Sure.
So how important is it to hire people that, in terms of what you're talking about, that intangible?
Well, and clearly for leadership, right? Like
Hmm.
part of your question was your Burke, your journey versus what would you say to an executive that perhaps is missing out on these crossover skills, right?
Right.
And for me, I think, you know, the what you just mentioned on roles that are not necessarily leadership or C-suite, I think there's probably um, criteria that applies to both, but certainly specifically, I don't like the word individual contributor versus manager. It's in
Right.
our vernacular and people use it very commonly, but it doesn't really portray what's going on. There is no individual. There's no such thing.
No,
Like
it's
that.
crossover skills and crossover projects in almost every functional area.
Yeah, like you don't just like sit there and do what you're told.
Right.
That doesn't exist.
Right.
So, um, but rather uh, perhaps the way to look at it is an um, like a caregiver, you know, like a leader should be that.
Uh-huh.
Almost like a parent, um, versus people who don't have that responsibility and accountability necessarily. It's not necessarily their job to set the culture. And when, you know, I think, I think this might be controversial, but we say a lot, like everyone has a part to play in the culture, but
Hmm.
that's not true. That drives people crazy. That drives those engineers who just joined the company, think that they can affect the culture, but they actually can't. It
Right.
drives them crazy. How could they? I mean, what influence they can have over a C-suite? The power
Well,
dynamics are off. The exposure is not there.
well, there's a
It's
huge difference, to your point, of driving and directing culture and being a part of a culture and
correct,
potentially a positive piece of the culture, right? Because you
correct,
can be a positive or a negative piece of
correct.
it,
Yes,
but
you may
but
or may not fit,
right,
but
and you
but
you get
yeah,
the opportunity to come in and be a good player. You're not the coach.
yes,
I mean, whatever sport you want to look like,
right,
you want to look at, depending on the amount of players, you get the opportunity to come in and fit and be an adjunct, a positive piece to the culture. And if you come and you bring enough value and you're promoted, and then you might get into a situation where you get to be a part of directing part of the culture or culture within the culture in terms of a departmental standpoint. But no, just because you came onto the company doesn't mean you necessarily get to to direct
yes.
culture. It's a huge
And
difference.
I think companies get this wrong, and C-suites get this wrong. Like there's this there's it's clearly you have to set your culture for your team, right? It needs to be
Mm,
in the DNA. But make no mistake, you are in charge of that. You can't
mm.
wash your hands off of it, be like, we said everybody is a part of it, so it's not my problem. That's wrong,
That's a cop out.
right? It is squarely on your shoulders, and it goes all the way to the top singular person in charge. It's your business and is your problem. If the culture is broken, you can't blame your people.
No.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the SSI Executive Conversations podcast. If you'd like to see more, please follow us on LinkedIn and subscribe to our YouTube and RSS. Visit ShurigSolutions.com to learn more about SSI and receive a complimentary consultation.